Thank you, Gareth, and welcome to tonight's Learning and Culture Scrutiny meeting. First number on the agenda is the appointment of Vice Chairman. Would anyone like to put themselves forward?
I'll nominate Rhiannon Birch.
I'll second Rhiannon Birch.
Okay, and would there like to be anyone else nominated? Okay, as there are no other nominations, I declare that Rhiannon Birch is Vice Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, and now moving on to agenda item 2, apologies for absence. Do we have any? I don't.
No, none, Chair, thank you. No apologies.
Okay, excellent. And then we're on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of February 2020. Does anyone have anything to bring up, or are we happy to pass the minutes?
Happy to pass.
Yeah, taken as read.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. And now we can move on to agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone have anything? Okay, silence. And now we can move on to the main body of the agenda, which is the presentation, agenda item 5, which is working towards recovery, September 2020. Who would like to take this?
Chair, I will start this off. I'd just like to ask whether the presentation is going to be shared on the screen or...
Yes, I can share the presentation on my screen, and if you just tell me when you want to change slides, I'll move the slides on. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both.
Okay, so this presentation provides members with an update on the Council's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the work that we've been developing to recover from that. Next month, I believe scrutiny committees will have a further presentation on the recovery strategy, which is being reported to Cabinet on the 21st of September. So the slide you can see in front of you now sets out the 3 stages of the Council's management of the pandemic: response, transition and recovery. Response is about the immediate action that was taken in March and early summer. As lockdown began easing, the transition phase was about managing services in ways in line with the government regulation and advice. The framework for recovery by Welsh Government is the strategy set out the steps by which the lockdown easing would be undertaken. Recovery then is the longer term focus of our work, built around different themes, which are described later in the presentation. Next slide. So when the pandemic struck, the Council defined a series of response objectives that guided its initial decision making. And as shown on the slide there, these focused on care for most vulnerable residents, maintaining and managing our public spaces, ensuring lockdown measures were in place, again in line with the Welsh Government advice and objectives, supporting our workforce to work flexibly and safely, working with and supporting our key partners, helping to keep business sustainable, keeping the Council going in terms of finance, governance and decision making, etc., and keeping people informed. Next slide. On the 23rd of March, Cabinet approved changes to the decision-making framework to enable swift decisions to be made using an emergency powers process. Emergency powers was signed by the Managing Director in consultation with the leader and the relevant Cabinet members, and they've been regularly published online. There's been regular communication from the leader and the MD to members, and some virtual meetings, as you know, have been held, starting with Cabinet and corporate performance in July. And as you know, this will be the norm now for some time to come. The Gold Command structure was brought in March, and that resulted in extending the corporate management team to include communications and our emergency planning colleagues, plus the leader and the deputy leader. It initially met daily, then 3 times a week, and now it meets weekly, and it addresses a list of issues and situation reports, and takes decisions in line with the response objectives I outlined for you earlier. Next slide. In the summer, a reflective learning exercise was undertaken with all senior staff across the council, and that was undertaken to identify particular issues as well as developing the foundations for the transition and recovery work. A series of questions were posed, as shown on the slide, and the findings of this work has informed the recovery, which will be described later. This has been discussed at a series of briefing meetings held by the MD with staff. We're now going to go on to some slides which relate specifically to work undertaken within the learning skills development. And I'm going to hand over to Trevor and David to present these slides, and I'll come back to the rest of the presentation later.
Thanks, Paula. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So as Paula mentioned, we thought it would be useful to put some details in today's presentation about some of the specific stuff we've been doing in supporting not just schools, but our young people and members of the community in general, just to give you folks a bit of context. So we've got a few slides. The first one here is talking about some of the pieces of work that have been going on in the background. The first one is in relation to the HUB program. So if you're not aware of what the HUB program is, it's a Welsh Government funded program that's seeking to give every pupil a consistent 21st century experience in terms of the tools they use in the classroom, as well as the infrastructure upon which they engage those tools with. So over the course of the pandemic, work has been continuing in the background. This involves our partners going on site and upgrading all of the cabling in classrooms and that sort of thing, as well as installing new servers, new wireless access points across all of our schools. And that program is going to last over the next about 10 to 12 months before they're all finished. The second point there is in relation to devices. So we have just started to receive the 3,931 new devices which are being deployed across all of our schools in the Vale. This is a mixed economy of things like iPads and Chromebooks and tablet devices and specialist devices, not just for pupils, but also for the educators as well, because we're very conscious of the fact that blended learning is becoming a new theme as we move through the pandemic and as we support schools, and we need to ensure that staff have the appropriate tools to do their jobs. You might have heard the term digital exclusion or digital inclusion. This came to the fore in about April time when we were trying to support children who were at home to be able to engage with their schools and to make sure that the mechanisms for that contact was in place. by and large, again, just to give you some perspective, we have about 23,000 pupils in the Vale. But during April, we identified and deployed 628 devices to pupils who didn't have access to one at home. In addition to that, we did about 200 MiFi devices. So these are wireless devices that give you an internet connection in the home to make sure that the kids could access the network, could contact their teachers if required, and that we could maintain that communication with them. The last points there are with regards to some of the data cleansing work and data mining work that we've done in related to those pupils eligible for free school meals. So again, to give you some idea of the context with that, we had about 4,000 inquiries coming in with regards to how we're supporting kids who are eligible for free school meals, and I'll come on to that in the background. And as well, over the COVID period, we had about 8,500 correspondences from families asking normal types of questions about the admissions process, which around finished in March, and those sorts of details. At the very bottom of the screen, this is just a snapshot, again, just to give you an idea of some of the support that was put out to schools. This is more around the logistics around everything. And during that period where schools reopened for 3 weeks at the end of term, some of the equipment that was deployed out to them, so things like hand sanitizers, meal tin, which was used to disinfect equipment, gloves, masks, aprons, all of that kind of stuff. So there's quite an industry going on at civic offices, make sure that this stuff is deployed. Again, this is just a snapshot of those 3 weeks, but of course, equipment was deployed all throughout lockdown with the hub, which I'll touch on in a minute. If we go on to the next slide. So there's some detail here, again, just to give you some metrics around some of the support we've put in place for our vulnerable pupils. One of the biggest topics was, what are we doing to support our kids who are eligible for free school meals, but of course weren't able to come into schools because of the pandemic. Across the course of lockdown, over 33,000 free school meal replacement vouchers were issued to 3,200 kids every fortnight. It's about £1.2 million worth of support. And this is a system that was turned around in the background in 48 hours after lockdown. It isn't a perfect system by any means, but it ensured that anyone who was able, anyone who needed to access support was able to do so, and those systems were in place. We worked with a number of partners, Big Fresh Catering Company, which is our council's own local authority trading company, spearheaded the operation for us. And then we worked with partners Tesco, Asda, and Philco, who are based in Lantwick Major, to make sure that there were local grocery stores available for those folks. The second point there is in relation to period dignity. So again, this is another issue that's cropped up. This committee has been responsible for a lot of progress in that area over the last couple of years. So again, it's just to highlight that that's something that we've been supporting with over 600 vouchers being issued to eligible pupils over the course of the pandemic. We've also been working with our schools, and our schools have taken the lead in many cases and should be commended for doing so in areas such as food parcel distribution, well-being services for family members, and partnerships with third sector organizations, so things like food banks and community hubs. And there's a picture on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen of Cadoxton Primer, and it's just a glimpse of some of the partnerships they were able to leverage to get food out to these families who, for whatever reason, some of them were shielding, some of them weren't able to leave the house, but to make sure that that provision was there for them. And then again, as I mentioned previously, business as usual continued in the background. We had a number of correspondence and questions that had come in for a range of topics that the teams were also dealing with in the background. If we hop over to the next slide, I'll hand you over to David.
Thank you, Trevor. Good evening, everyone. Just taking on that theme really about our support for more vulnerable pupils. I think during the pandemic and since the closure of schools, which seems like an eternity ago, I think one of the massive strengths that's shone through is how everybody has worked in partnership, both ourselves with schools, children's services, health professionals, and the third sector. It's been a real joint effort. And just in terms of what we did very quickly when schools closed, was we identified in partnership with children's services who our most vulnerable children and young people were. This was a joint list that came from children's services, so those young people known to be on the child protection register, for example, our own intelligence, also the intelligence of schools. So that was quite a huge undertaking, but we established this list, which led to us rating each of those vulnerable pupils, and therefore we looked to support them in any way we could, particularly those who are identified as being red in that category. We did this through lots of work with the schools, but the youth service provided support to young people throughout school closure, with a school-based counselling service, established an online presence, and all our outreach teams continued to work, and particularly those around the engagement service were offering support to parents and online, and by producing resources for those young people with on the autistic spectrum, and for those with emotional and mental health difficulties as well. Thank you, guys. We'll move on. So obviously our most vulnerable pupils attend Ysgol y Derry. On that note, I hope people have had a chance to watch the programme, which is being aired at the moment, which shows all the fantastic work that goes on in that school, and it's a credit to the council. But this was a massive effort, because a number of these young people have very significant difficulties, health difficulties, some of very complex medical issues. So obviously ensuring their safety was paramount when they weren't attending school. So this was a huge multi-agency effort alongside health, with the senior leadership team having weekly video conferencing with social services and with health as well. And one of the really strong things that came out of it was the school established a health hub at the school, where there was therapeutic and nursing staff available to try and support parents and young people however they could, obviously in the very difficult circumstances which they were facing. Okay. Yeah, just wanted also to highlight some of the work that we did during the summer. Obviously, just prior to the summer, the schools went back for a short period of time, but still, a number of young people hadn't been in any formal education for any time at all, really. So it was really important that we tried to take the pressure off parents during the summer, more so than we've ever done before. So we established a really comprehensive provision, and that was very much a joint effort as well. And I really have to, at this stage, thank colleagues in children's services and those working with play as well within the council, for all the work that we did in partnership to achieve what we did over the summer. Also, our schools, 4 of our primary schools at very short notice were utilised some grant funding in order to provide summer activities for pupils at their schools, and that led to provision for over 500 young people. And in addition to this, there were various schemes. There was the teen scheme that ran from Ysgolor, which was supporting children with disabilities, children and young people with disabilities, and a number of other activities all throughout the Vale of Glamorgan, and provision for that group of young people. So in all, I think we supported around 600 pupils, and worked with Children's Service to identify those who really must have provision. So that worked really well as well. Okay, I think Trevor's going to take over from here.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I thought it would be useful just to visualize some of the uptake we've had, and it feels really strange talking about hubs because it was a long time ago at this point, although it feels like it's been a blink of an eye. What this chart is showing is the demand for our hub provision. Across the Vale, we set up 13 different hubs to support key workers and vulnerable children during the national lockdown, primarily to support blue light services like the police and the NHS. And this is broken down into 5 separate categories. The blue line is the number of schools open, which was consistent with the exception of any days where there wasn't provision needed, and typically that was over the weekends. The orange line is the number of children attending on any given day. The grey line is the number of children of critical workers. The yellow line is the number of vulnerable children, and the blue line is the number of staff present. And I suppose the thing to take away from that chart is just to see, you can see at the very beginning on the left-hand side, that's the 23rd of March. So that's when schools were first closing and going into lockdown. And then from the beginning of April, that's when we started having regular provision. The provision we offered in the Vale was the best provision in the country initially during lockdown. It was 7 days a week for 12 hours a day. That was done in conjunction with conversations with the Cardiff and Vale Local Health Board based on some of the shift patterns that they had. So that provision was there to support our local communities and our families. And again, credit to schools. They, many of them wanted to do more wherever they could to do that. We see dips, that's over the weekend. So typically over the weekend, where families were able to make alternative arrangements, by and large, they were able to do so. But the trend across the piece is as we move forward through April, May, and June, we can see those numbers were increasing across the board. So the number of staff on site, the number of vulnerable pupils, the number of key workers, and the total number in the schools. If we jump to the next slide. This is a breakdown of the different hubs that we had across the Vale, and just to give you an indication of those numbers. So this chart works the opposite way. So the most recent date is on the left-hand side, and the beginning of lockdown in April is on the right-hand side. So it's slanted in a different direction. But you can see consistently across the board increases in pupils in those buildings. And again, we need to cast our minds back. That was a time where we might have a school with a capacity of 600 pupils, but because of the conditions at the time, we were setting limits of 10 to 15 to 20%, depending on the geography of the building, in terms of maximum capacity, at a time when we didn't know anything about the virus. So as we moved through the hub program, where it was needed, we made changes. We set up a strong governance structure with our hub leads and our head teacher steering group, meeting on a regular basis, and it was a 24/7 operation. So between officers in the local authority and head teachers and staff in schools, it was days, evenings, and weekends that we were on the phone, problem solving and making sure that where we could look after these kids, we did, and where there were issues, they were addressed. The provision we had in the hub as well included meals. So for anyone who was in the hub, including staff, they had 3 meals a day plus snacks. Again, part of this was infection control, but also to make sure that any of the children who were visiting us in our hubs had a consistent experience and were able to be fed and looked after. If we hop over to the next slide. Moving away from schools and giving you some updates on some of the other areas of the business. This slide just gives some information on what we've done with libraries. And I think what sums it up for me is a letter that we had from a member of the community talking about the kindness that they've experienced, and that word kindness resonates for me from the librarians throughout lockdown who transitioned from being an enterprise looking at primarily books to well-being hubs in a lot of senses. So some of the details on there for the work that was done is available. So it was things like waiving fines. Just before everything locked down, we put signs up in all of our libraries, big bright pink signs that said take as many books as you can and don't worry about the fines, so that people had something to do and something to read. We pushed our digital borrowing opportunities. So we already had magazines and audiobooks available through the website. We did a campaign to extend the provision available on there. So we added things like some additional comic books and things for kids of that nature. And we had a number of different options, BorrowBox, uLibrary, and RB Digital. So people could use their tablets and they could loan books using their own devices at home. There was some new provision for things like Ancestry.com, which is, you could get lost doing your genealogy for months, if not years. So this is a free provision. It's usually a paid for service. This was available for free, anyone using our library. A lot of the programs that we do in libraries are fundamental for folks in our communities. And I'm thinking of things like Rhyme and Sign and Storytime sessions with our young people, where parents bring their kids in. So those were moved into online fora. We were using existing tools like Facebook Live, for example, WhatsApp and Zoom, so that we could have these virtual engagements and sing-alongs bilingually as well with our kids across the Vale. Our reading groups continued. They extended into email and WhatsApp groups, which was great. Our social groups thrived, so the amount of people who were engaging with us on social media went up. And we were able to keep in touch with some of those vulnerable groups through our housebound library service. A couple of months ago, we launched a click and collect service. So although we weren't able to invite members of the community into the library to browse, what we did was set up a process where, just like with takeaways in restaurants, you can find your books online, book an appointment and come and collect. And that's been really successful and something we're going to look to continue doing in the future. Business as usual programs, again, were going on in the background. So the example I cited there is the makerspace at Penarth Library. So the capital work has continued to make sure that these spaces for artists, young people, people with an interest in the digital arts or 3D printing or what have you is going to be available to them at the earliest possible time when it's safe to do so. If we hop to the next one. Adult and community learning, again, there was lots of initiatives that went down through lockdown on this. One of the biggest ones, and it's the picture in the top right-hand corner there, in partnership with Communities for Work, we set up an employability hub in the main hall at Palmerston. I think that's a really important facility to put in place, because there is a lot of concern with programs like furlough and people maintaining employment. People who were going through our programs before COVID, looking to get jobs, that was halted completely. And those face-to-face support opportunities for folks who aren't as comfortable with digital technologies or English language or Welsh language, they need those opportunities for those face-to-face discussions. So that's been set up, and an appointment system, and that's been running for the last month or so. We've secured some funding for the Vale Learning Centre to deliver lessons for parents at Flying Start over the summer.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Oh, yes, hi.
Not sure if we can.
No, I didn't, and I'm on a meeting.
Andrew?
No, don't worry. I thought it might.
I feel like I'm eavesdropping on a personal conversation. I'll carry on. We set up online learning opportunities, as you would expect.
Now, give me a call first thing tomorrow morning. So I'm sort of trying to talk so quietly, and I can just run through it quickly with you in the morning. Okay. 8:30, 9 o'clock, it's no problem. Okay. Give me a call on my mobile. Have you got that one? 07702.
We'll have to bleep
Andrew.
it out.
To tell him he's online and
2516.
he's given a number
The other
of
one is, the home number is 01446, obviously.
Councillor Parker, can you stop?
7810.
Councillor Parker.
Can you stop, Councillor Parker?
Yeah, what you've got is my
Councillor
Morgan
Parker.
number, I think. Yeah, not a problem. Chat tomorrow. Bye. Bye.
There we go.
No,
Um,
I'll edit the video afterwards.
There we go. We've put together a new program of learning which has been submitted to Welsh Government. This takes into account COVID restrictions, but again, all credit is due to the ACL team who are looking at innovative ways to deliver these lessons online in methodologies that suit the different styles of learners that we have. In ACL, we're also looking to replicate the success we had with the digital exclusion program in our schools. We've been able to secure some grant funding to, again, get some additional devices and wireless broadband connections into the homes of some of our learners who need that support. If we hop on to the next slide. There we go. Again, this is just some information on some of our Learn Welsh initiatives. Again, very close to my heart. It's a very successful program, and again, they've thrived. All credit to the team over lockdown. There's a picture on the right-hand side of some of the steps they've put in place to make sure that face-to-face engagement, where appropriate, is done in a safe way with social distancing and perspex screens. And you can see some data from the team in terms of the number of online courses and learners who we've been able to maintain throughout lockdown and give them that continuity of learning as well, which is really, really important going forward. And then last slide from me. Again, the business as usual stuff, I've mentioned it a few times, but it's important to note, you know, a lot of work you would expect to happen to continue has actually happened in the background. School budgets and finances is one. I mean, that's a whole conversation for another day, of course, but it's worth noting that schools have still had to look at their budgets and submit their budgets and recovery plans where appropriate to the council. We've been working very closely with them on that. There is a hardship fund that's been set up, funded by Welsh Government, operated through the council, to support schools with COVID costs. So this might be additional staffing or staffing cover where it's needed in relation to COVID, or some of the other expenditure linked to cleaning and supplies, that sort of thing. School admissions has continued in the background, not just in learning and skills, but with support from Democratic colleagues around school appeals panels and that sort of thing, which have happened online. There's a quotation there: over 90% of parents received an offer for their first choice of primary or secondary school on the national offer date in the Vale. So that continued. 21st Century Schools was largely unaffected with lockdown because workers were able to continue on site. We have a very good relationship with our partners who are delivering our schools, and an exceptional 21st Century Schools team who liaise with them to develop these programs. One of the success stories through that was the development of a bespoke app, Vale of Glamorgan branded app, that was done in conjunction with ISG, and that was made available to our schools, and it had information on things like social distancing, on hand washing. There were pictures of our schools and some of the steps we were putting in place for families to look at, to see, to manage those expectations in terms of what it would be like to send their children back. So those relationships have thrived. There's some pictures on the right-hand side. The top left-hand is Pencoitra. The steelworks have gone up there. Again, if you happen to drive by, it's amazing the progress that's happened over the last few weeks. On the right-hand side, we handed over all of the alterations and changes to Bromagannog. They had a couple of new wings and some renovations done on the inside. And then at the bottom, that's a picture of Whitmore High School. That picture is about 2 weeks old at this point, and they've already started to put the brickwork up. So that's amazing how quickly that's flown up. Again, it's a testament to all the people involved who've been able to make that happen over the last few months. Governor support services, for example, recruitment with schools has carried on. We've had some heads who have retired. We have new heads coming on board. We had regular issues that needed to be dealt with, so those services were in place. That support was there. Big Fresh, again, this is the council's first local authority trading company. It launched in January and we went into lockdown on the 20th of March. There's 170 staff there. Those 170 staff are still employed. They have done exceptionally well in supporting our schools, and they have even managed to turn a profit over the last few months in supporting our communities with local delivery services. And every single penny of the profit that they've brought in has been able to support our schools going forward. So I'm very proud of the team there. The hub program, I mentioned already, that work is ongoing. And then the last point, I had to put it in, I have to say a massive thank you, from all of us in the civic offices to all of our staff in schools and beyond for the work that they've done over the last few months. It's been difficult, but we've been able to deliver, and I'm very proud of them. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Trevor. Moving back to the corporate part of the presentation, a wellbeing survey was undertaken with all staff being invited to respond. The survey asked questions in the 5 areas you can see there on the slide: health and wellbeing, senior leadership, line manager support, communication and working conditions. Moving on to the next slide, there were 1,126 responses to the survey, which is a very good response rate. 70% of those responding to the survey were actually working from home at that time. The initial response was that the majority didn't want to go back to the old ways of office working. Next slide. Staff were asked to respond about how worried they are about coronavirus and the impact on them personally, and also were asked about their mental health. And you can see the response to that there in the slides. I'd also point out that the responses that were given were more positive than the ONS averages. Next slide. So this slide shows a series of questions relating to health and well-being, getting information, understanding the steps being taken, and the extent to which people feel that the council cares about its employees. The results were generally very positive. In terms of senior leaders, there was significant trust in decisions taken to protect colleagues, with just over half suggesting that senior leaders visibly role model behaviours, and that they've been sufficiently visible and accessible. Next slide. Communications to staff have been regular, including a weekly message from the MD, StaffNet Plus information, and there's a lot of guidance which is accessible to all staff, and staff can now access that through their own personal devices. The slide shows very positive feedback in this area, and the opportunity to engage in two-way communication has been identified as an area for further development. Since the survey was undertaken, a number of sessions of the Learning Cafe have been run, and there have been opportunities for staff to have question and answer sessions with the Managing Director. Next slide. The response relating to the questions about line management was highly positive. So it included over 90% of respondents feeling trusted to do their jobs, 83% feeling their manager cares for their health and well-being, and 87% that managers have been accessible and in frequent contact with them. These scores, I think, are particularly important in the context of the majority of staff working remotely, and it may be the reason why 90% of people said that they had an understanding of the changes expected of them. So work will now progress in the areas of working arrangements and flexibility and working environment. Since the survey was undertaken, guidance has been refreshed and recirculated to staff regarding things like desk assessment at home, and there's been further promotion of resources to support people's mental health and well-being. So the findings of the survey are now being analysed, and they'll be made available to directors on an individual directorate basis, and that will help us to identify then any specific issues that we need to pick up and feed into our recovery plans. Next slide. So the second phase of the Council's management of the pandemic is the transition period between the response and the recovery. Thank you. So with transition, the objectives are in managing the services in line with the need to keep people safe, but also respond to the easing of lockdown and for example, in reopening services and supporting others to reopen services. In some respects, this period has been less time pressured, and it's enabled time, therefore, to support different groups, for example, businesses in preparing for changes. But in other areas, you'll know that announcements have continued to be made quickly, and certainly in respect of schools reopening, we've been fully stretched, and it feels like there's not time to do anything but respond and be in that response mode still. So at the moment, it still feels very difficult to move on to that recovery period for schools. I suppose the transition period is also allowing some time in some areas to work with our partner organisations. So transition is being, can you go back a slide? Thanks. The transition is being managed by direct recovery teams and corporate recovery teams where there's cross-cutting issues. The pandemic has meant that we've had to undertake, as has been said, council business in different ways for several months now. And I mentioned earlier the emergency powers process. Formal meetings and decision makings are now starting to operate again, as you know, and there are new challenges. For example, doing business through virtual meetings. Next slide. So in parallel with the work on response and transition, consideration is being given by public bodies across Wales as to what the recovery from coronavirus will look like. And the thinking about recovery is framed around the principles there that you can see on the screen. And these reflect the significant opportunity presented to learn from what's been experienced during the pandemic in the context of uncertainty. Next slide. So drawing on the reflective learning exercise that was undertaken and from research elsewhere, a series of cross-cutting themes have emerged, need to be reflected in our recovery work. And these are listed here, and it'll be important also to use the 5 ways of working from the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in their delivery. Next slide. In April, the Council began to work on the new corporate plan for 2020 to 25. There are 4 new wellbeing objectives shown here across the top of that table. And the 6 recovery themes that you saw on the previous slide align quite well with 3 of the wellbeing objectives, with the 4th objective, which is to work with and for our communities, is the guiding objective in how these are delivered. Next slide. So we're reporting the coronavirus recovery strategy to Cabinet on the 21st of September. And the strategy will show for each objective a reminder of what we want to achieve by that objective, the relevant recovery themes that link with the objective, a series of threats and opportunities for each objective which have been identified in the context of the pandemic, the strategic actions that will be taken. These are a set of priorities that will be progressed in coming months. The strategic actions will then be used by directorates and cross-cutting teams to develop the plans that progress the relevant activity across the Council. Next slide. CMT Gold continues to meet weekly at the moment, but that can be ramped up if required. And as I mentioned previously, at the start of the pandemic and the lockdown, we were meeting every day. The strategy, as I said previously, will be reported to Cabinet on the 21st of September, and that will we'll provide an overview of that to the scrutiny committees in October. And that includes important data and information that will be drawn together in economic and community impact assessments. Okay, so I believe that concludes a very long presentation. So thank you for being so patient and sticking with it. Happy to take any questions.
Liz, do you want to speak first before we do? Muted, Liz.
Thank you. If I could, it was a very comprehensive presentation, so I won't go into any depth, but the team were very keen to thank everybody around them. They didn't give themselves recognition for the huge amounts of work that they have undertaken since the middle of March, and the tireless effort that Paula, Trevor, Dave and Marwen have put into pulling this together. I've seen some of the letters that have come in from schools. I don't think we've ever had such a constructive working relationship with schools in the Vale of Glamorgan. They have been absolutely fabulous and have pulled out all the stops in making, remaking, adjusting and refining plans, all in incredibly short timescales. They've worked really hard. Our schools have worked really hard with the team on undertaking risk assessments to make sure that children can go back in as safe a way as possible. And I'm not sure if committee members will have picked up the amount of multitasking that's been going on, where we've had staff from the 20th Century School programme working in care homes. We talked about the free school meal vouchers, but people who were also juggling the admissions process were working on allocating free school meal vouchers. Our school staff and teachers have been not only working in childcare hubs, they've been coordinating distance learning for children that weren't in school, and then also, as you saw, making food deliveries out to vulnerable families. And what Kate has come through it for me the whole way is their only one thought was care and support for children and their families in the Vale. We've heard about adult community learning. Sitting on a table next to me in my office is actually my family tree now, going back to the mid-1700s, which has been my mindful exercise when I haven't been working. But I have to say that sometimes we've been able to achieve things in giant strides, and sometimes it's been in fairy footsteps, and that's the way it's going to continue as we try to continue delivering services in an ever-changing world. There isn't a blueprint for this. So there will be post-lockdown issues, and we will continue to work on that, and there'll be further updates on that to committee. But I know that the education team will continue to step up, and it would be really good if they could have the support and thanks of the committee.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, would anyone like to ask any questions regarding the presentation? Sandra?
Yes, please. I'd like to ask a question. I just wondered, sort of talking about the hubs and things like that, how the directorate went about sort of rotating the staff, where the staff were pulled from to work, say, I know that Romley Hub, you know, had lots of different pupils from lots of different areas in Barry, and how you coordinated getting the staff, you know, from the various different schools to work at the various hubs and things like that, please.
We worked with head teachers, first of all, to decide which were going to be hub leads. And they agreed that amongst themselves, with a little help from us and a little suggestion as to which schools should be the hubs. And after discussion, we did make some adjustments to the model after consulting with the heads. And then those hub leads actually worked with the heads of the schools feeding into that hub to develop rotas to cover the hubs. And we actually didn't get involved in that. They did that as group head teachers for each hub. And, you know, there were some challenges, particularly where some schools had very limited capacity because of staff self-isolating, staff with their own childcare issues, and so on. So that was a challenge on occasion. What I would say is there was a tremendous amount of goodwill from school staff, because our childcare hubs didn't necessarily have to be based in schools, and it was made very clear to us by the unions that in fact schools did not have to provide childcare, and that we could only enlist their support on a voluntary basis. But there were so many staff who really wanted to help. And it was very successful as a result. And, you know, even over the weekends, we were, I think, one of the a limited number of authorities in Wales who actually opened the hubs over the weekends. And we were the only authority in Wales to run their hub for 12 hours a day. And we did that to actually fit in with the shift patterns of NHS, well, the blue light workers really, because that feedback was coming back as a requirement from the police too.
Trevor?
Just to add to that, one of the other things we tried to do was, because there was so much uncertainty, one of our priorities was to try and give as much predictability to the hubs as possible. And as part of that was running a centralized admissions system for all of the hub schools across the Vale. What that allowed us to do basically was give those hub schools a lead time of a number of days where they had their rotas that they set in place, and then if they needed to tweak them or if they needed to draw in staff, they had some days to work that out. And one of the best, successes with that, I think, is given all of the uncertainty in many cases. As Paula said, we had teachers and non-teaching staff in schools who were desperate to get involved, but because they had that level of predictability, they weren't in schools that often. They were able to manage that, to give themselves a break in between, for the most part, and I think that was helpful in controlling any sort of spread at the time.
Could I just come back? I just also like to sort of agree with Councillor Burnett in, that this committee sort of thanks the directorate, the officers and the staff in the various different sections, the tremendous hard work that they've undertaken during this very difficult period, sort of multitasking. I know that Trevor's multitask because I saw him on Monday where he helped me with the IT section and stuff like that. So, it's not just sort of like the school staff and things like that. I know that the officers have also multitasked at various levels. So I would really like this committee to sort of put our thanks forward for all the hard work and the recognition for everything that you've done during the lockdown as well.
Great, thank you, Sandra. Rhiannon, are you unmuted? If you would like to ask a question. No, okay. Would anyone like to ask a question whilst we get Rhiannon online?
I'm not sure. Can you hear me? Could you sum up, Stephen, if you can hear me?
Hi there. Who's on the line?
Well then. No, obviously I'm having a problem. I've got all the pictures, but I haven't got any sound. And just really to say exactly what Sandra and Liz have said, it's a thoroughly remarkable effort. I mean, you're actually looking quite well on it, you two, on the television. So good luck and keep the work up. There we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, if there isn't any other questions, I'm happy to move on to the next agenda item. But thank you very much.
So just to check, Chair, we're happy to note the contents of the presentation as a committee, are you?
Yeah, is everyone in agreement?
Yes, happy.
Thumbs up there. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Trevor, Paula, and David. That was a great presentation. And now we move on to the reports of the Director of Learning and Skills. So number 6 is the annual delivery plan monitoring report, Q1 performance. Over to you, Paula.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents our performance for Q1 towards achieving our annual delivery plan commitments. And despite the challenges we've faced, progress has been made, and we have an amber status attributed to this. So 65%, or 149 out of the 228 planned activities have been awarded a green status, and 20% of those were attributed a red status. Of the 47 activities with a red status, 33 of those, there was a result of us having to reprioritise our measures in response to the pandemic. We also then have the 43 performance measures, and 24 of those had a green status, 1 an amber status and 9 a red status. And data wasn't available for 9 the measures. So of those with a red status, again, it is the impact of COVID-19 that's caused that red status. It is a very detailed report. The performance overview is presented in Appendix A to the report. And then the report on the progress against the service actions is shown in Appendix 1. And then a report on the performance measures is shown in Appendix 2. So I'm happy to take any questions members have.
Thank you, Paula. Would anyone like to ask a question? It's all quiet. Hi, Neil. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, if it's appropriate now, on the service action plans.
It's too late. You can still answer questions.
Hi, Rihanna. You need to mute yourself.
Because you make a decision, so it doesn't matter. You need to raise questions anyway.
Could you mute Rihanna, please, Gareth?
I will, yes. I will.
Are we all right now?
Okay, Neil, you can continue. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask Paul, I mean, with the back to school thing, really, it's become evident over the certainly anecdotally over the summer, and from the report of the Healthy Living Committee the other day, that there's been an increase in the number of children who are being looked after, and a lot more having to go kind of out of county with complex needs. How's that affecting our side of it, the learning side of it? And the other element that I wanted to ask is, considering the amount of domestic violence that seems to have been recorded and allegedly increasing in such a concerning way, the number of children that are being directly affected by that, this obviously has implications for the schools and teachers having to be aware of their kids as they return being affected directly by this, how we're responding and what we're seeing as well, please.
Shall I take that?
Can I ask Dave to respond to that question?
Yeah, obviously the past few months have not been without their impact. So we are trying to support schools in the return to, helping young people return to school. So we did have a back to school training. We're doing a lot of work with the trauma informed schools approach, and all schools access training on trauma informed and the impact of the pandemic and being out of school, to try and give those schools strategies in terms of knowing what to expect and knowing what to look for with young people coming back to school. To be honest, Councillor Thomas, at the moment it's very early days in seeing the actual impact. I think everybody's expecting there to be more young people coming forward and disclosing what we may suspect has happened during lockdown, but as they become more confident in their settings and able to share with members of staff. So we are expecting that, and as a consequence, there has been additional funding from Welsh Government grant funding, and we put more funding into school-based counselling, and we've also looked at diverting some of that money to start looking at counselling or therapeutic services within primary schools as well, which isn't really covered by the school-based counselling finances at the moment. So yeah, it's very much at the moment it's preparing for what might come and what we expect to come. Thankfully, at the moment, what we're getting reported is that the vast majority of young people are just happy to be back in school. And having that routine that may wear off. We don't know, but certainly at the moment they're happy to be back in school, and everybody is pulling together. I have no doubt, though, that the cracks that will have been caused during lockdown will emerge at some point, and we have to be, we have to be ready for that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, it was the anticipating and preparation I was kind of driving at. But while I'm backing up, can I just add my thanks and admiration to all the staff who performed so outstandingly over the last 6 months and are continuing to do so. And yeah, basically, I think this committee needs to formally recognise and thank staff. And I'd like to propose that we do that, Stephen, in a formal way.
That sounds like a very fine proposal, and I'm happy to back that. Everyone in agreement?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, we'll work, Gareth, to...
Yeah, we'll come up with a recommendation, and the thanks will be passed on to all staff. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Neil. Any other questions regarding the report? I see no hands raised up, so I believe that's it. So do we have 2 recommendations, Gareth?
The main recommendations are really, if members are happy just to note the contents of the report, and there'll be a recommendation then to pass on the committee's thanks and appreciation to all staff involved. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Everyone happy with that? Great. Okay. And now we can move on to agenda item 7, which is the revenue and capital monitoring for the period of 1st of April to 31st of July 2020. Who would like to take this?
Good evening. Hi,
Hi, Gemma.
yes, I would please. Hello. So in terms of the revenue position, it is still quite early in the financial year to get a clear picture of the service's financial position. As Trevor picked up in his presentation and is noted in the report, we have been able to draw down on hardship funding for COVID-19 and also some loss of income funding for Q1. What funding will be available as this year progresses is very much an emerging picture, so we need to keep that under review. We have quite a significant pressure within the service in the area of school transport, and this is an overspend of 396,000. There was a small award of in 2021 for 135,000, but as the outturn for 1920 was 386,000 overspent, and there's clearly a sustained pressure in this area, and we need to do a bit more of an in-depth review in the coming months. Sorry, is that my feedback there that's causing problems? In adult and community learning, we've been able to draw down funding to cover the lost income for Q1 from Welsh Government, and we need to keep this area under review as the year progresses. We have a couple of environment requests in the area of ALN. 290,000 from the service has been transferred into inclusion, which is part of the standards and provision service. And there's also 100,000 environment that was actioned earlier in the year under delegated authority. And this is a environment of 100,000 from schools to ALN to help manage more complex and additional needs. And this was, as I said, progressed via a delegated authority. There's only a small efficiency target in 2021 of 45,000, which the service expects to achieve by the end of the year. Moving on to capital, this budget was set in February, and listed in the report are a number of delegated authorities that have been actioned since then in order to progress the capital programme. We also have some emergency powers. There's a significant one for 21st century schools. As you'll be aware, this is a large and complex programme, so I would expect this programme to change fairly frequently. There is transfer of some funding between schemes. There's an increase in funding for Barry Waterfront, and there's also an increase in funding for primary provision in the Western Vale, St David's and St Nicholas, and this is part of an approach to reduce carbon as part of the delivery of the scheme. there's a reduction in cost for the Band B primary provision in Cowbridge scheme. In paragraphs 2.13 to 2.15, there sets out some various realigning of budgets, and 2.16 is looking at it, it looks to be silent on the school that this affects, and it affects Holton Primary School. As Trevor picked up in his presentation, good progress has been made against Band B schemes, particularly the top 3 schemes. Obviously, the Appendix 2 that you're seeing is spend as at the end of July, but spend has continued to progress. So you'll see some good progress against those budget figures when we have our next monitoring again. In terms of the other schemes that we would normally see delivered over the summer, the vast majority of those schemes have made good progress over the summer. We have run into the occasional scheme with some issues, but that would always be the case. But those schemes where there have been issues will be progressed where possible in October half term, and we'll get some more information on that coming back to the next monitoring report. That was all I was going to pick up on the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gemma. Anyone who would like to comment or ask any questions on the report? Hi, Rhiannon. Do you have a question?
Okay. No, I was going to welcome the work being done on Victoria. The toilets there have been politely a running sore for a long time, so I'm gratified to see that that's been done. Though I'm not really surprised that they're in a really terrible condition. They were in a terrible condition when I was there, and that's quite a long time ago, as they were when my daughters were there. So no, I'm pleased to see that this work has been able to go on against the background of everything else that's been happening. It's gratifying to see that the bread and butter of the department is being attended to, as well as all of the extra matters that they've had to take on during these last 6 months. And of course, I imagine they're still holding plans in abeyance, because if you think about what's happened in the rest of Wales so far, we only have a very small idea of what might be around the corner. As you know, I've got friends teaching in Caerphilly, and I know that state of flux is a very polite way of putting it. Thank you.
Cheers, Rhiannon. Liz, would you like to come in?
I didn't mute myself properly this time. Only a quick note is that we've already heard that the 21st Century School Capital Programme has gone ahead, in some cases faster than expected when there weren't children in the school, and their work actually has been hugely important also in developing the app that's helped us to socially distance so effectively, or manage social distancing effectively in schools. So that's been a positive. There were issues with the asset renewal programme, because if you can understand that the smaller businesses that deliver those sorts of projects had issues around social distancing, around self-isolation of some of their employees, and so we had to hold back on putting tenders out for that work. So again, it's testament to the organisation skills of the team that work has all been delivered over the school holiday period. And an awful lot of the work which is mentioned as being in progress, that because this report goes up to 31st of July, it actually means that they are completed. So they've delivered that alongside, you know, the full 21st Century School programme as well. So just wanted to add my thanks in for that too.
Thank you very much, Liz. Anyone else?
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Wilson has posed a question on the chat. He's asking about the wall at Victoria Primary School. Is that something that could be answered? He just mentioned the wall. I don't know whether there's some issue with the wall there.
Gareth, I can't see the chat. How do we view that? I'm sorry, I'm more familiar with Teams, but
yeah, it's because Councillor Wilson's an attendee. It just goes straight to the organiser. So unfortunately, you won't be able to see it. But it's just a simple question. any update on the wall of Victoria? That's basically what Councillor Wilson's asking.
Trevor looks like he-
I'll be honest with you. I know that there is work progressing looking at the wall, and there were a number of issues that were under consideration. I would have to go back and get the actual details on that because my brain is a bit full at the moment, but there is stuff that's being done. So let me look into that and I'll send an email through.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, everyone's happy on my screen. So there was just one recommendation, was just to go through the report and consider the position. Are we all okay with this? Okay, great. Okay, with that, we are moving on to the final agenda item 8, which is the updated work programme. So Gareth, I assume it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Something for me, just I'll be fairly brief. We normally would be taking decision tracking with the work programme, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there isn't much to report, so we'll take decision tracking next month. But I just want to highlight the Appendix A, which is a new work programme that we've devised in Democratic. So it's it includes a bit more information regarding the purpose of reports and the impact. So hence the reason why now it's 15 pages as opposed to 2 pages as it used to be. So there's more detail there for members and members of the public. So it's more descriptive of what's been reported. So I'm basically asking members if they're happy to accept the work programme and for it to be uploaded onto the website, or if there's any suggestions that members want to look at. Bear in mind that we are doing the COVID-19 pandemic, and I can see Paula has raised her hand, so thank you.
Paula and then Sandra.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to say we have 2 strategic consultations that we need to bring to the next Scrutiny Committee. One is on the proposals to establish a new school in Cowbridge. That's a new proposal. And the other is on establishment of a Centre of Learning and Wellbeing in Barry and a resource base at Gladstone Primary School. So if we brought that to the next Scrutiny Committee, that will just be before the end of the consultation period, so Scrutiny Committee could let us have its views.
Neil, would you like to come in quickly? I don't know whether about those 2.
Yeah, just something I think might be missing off the forward programme. Going back to the service action plans that we were talking about earlier, and looking at ADP 17, and this seems to be part of our remit, identify and develop suitable gypsy and traveller site in consultation with what's going on in the Welsh Gov. Now, apparently, I'm not entirely sure how this is a learning and culture matter, except, well, maybe the culture side of it, I guess, is where it comes under this remit of this committee. But we need to, that needs to be in there somewhere, because it doesn't appear to be there.
I agree, Councillor. It's come to this committee because it's an equalities issue, so it'll also go to homes and safe communities. It used to, Gypsy and Travel, it used to go to environment regeneration, but because of the equality issue, now part of it sits under this committee. I'll speak to Pam Toms, who's the leader, who's the officer leader on this, and see when a report is expected, and I'll update the work programme accordingly, and I'll let members know.
It's actually marked in the report we got earlier as still being part of E&R as well.
Yeah, that's probably an oversight by the performance team. So I did query with them, because that's one point that I picked up quite quickly, that we met the committee, but they may have got their wires crossed a bit. But I'll clarify it after the meeting. I'll let members know.
Okay, thanks very much, Gareth.
Sandra, if I go back to Paula's proposal.
Thank you. There's another thing that we were working on last year, a few of us, was a task and finish group about the cost of schooling, and I can't see that anywhere on here. We were talking around, you know, sort of like the cost of uniform, the cost of school proms and stuff like that.
That was, sorry, Councillor, sorry to interrupt, but we'll pick that again up in October when things get back more normal. We'll get the task finish route back started, and we can carry on with the work that was being progressed before lockdown.
Okay, and can I, sorry Gareth, can I just ask you one other thing? They are on here. It's the number 16 on the report presentations. So the site visit to the new catering service and to High Street Primary School. Now, I don't know whether they're sort of not last year's work, if you like, but the year before's. And how do we move that up the agenda to ensure that it actually happens within this year? Scrutiny year.
I think in terms of the catering report, we were going to have a report now at some point from Trevor, so we were going to go and coordinate the visit with the catering report. So obviously that's been impacted by COVID, and similarly the visit to High Street. So we let things settle down before for members go out to see the school. But some will be arranged over the next few weeks, or if not, by the end of October, hopefully.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, going back to Paula's recommendation regarding the two proposals about the school in Cowbridge and the Wellbeing Centre, does anyone have any objections or concerns? Sounds like a sensible idea to me to move that up the agenda. Is that doable, Gareth? Sounds fine.
I'll amend the work programme on the basis that there'd be two extra reports in October. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Okay, does anyone else have anything to bring up regarding the work programme? All quiet? Okay, and then we're on to the final part, which is the urgent part one. I have nothing, and nothing in part two, so the meeting has come to a close. Thank you very much for joining this evening, and thank you everyone who's participated, and thank you Paula, Trevor, Gemma, David, and have a good evening. Cheers all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Have we stopped recording now, Gareth?
Mark?
Yes, Gareth?
I can't seem to end the recording.
Right, on the sharing tab, you know the sharing bit on the drop down?
Yeah, I got it. I found it. Thanks. Got it.